Before sleep reaches for you, before your thoughts soften and slip, let me ask you something that feels harmless, until it doesn't. When you look up at the night sky, do you feel like you're looking at something still, or something moving so slowly that your mind mistakes it for stillness? Because the truth is darker and quieter than most people can tolerate. The sky is not a picture. It is a corridor. A cold, endless corridor with traffic you cannot hear, cannot feel, cannot smell. And sometimes, something crosses that corridor close enough to be detected, close enough to be measured, close enough to press its shadow against the edge of our certainty. And here is the unsettling part. It doesn't arrive with a sound. It doesn't arrive with a glow. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It arrives as a faint point inside a database, and the only reason it becomes real is because a human being notices one small betrayal in the numbers. Not a scream, a hesitation, a tiny refusal, and the universe changes its tone. Tonight we follow that refusal. Tonight we follow the object labeled like an office file, 3i/Atlas, and the moment Japanese scientists looked at what should have been ordinary and felt something colder than curiosity. Because the question is never just, what is it? The question that holds you, quietly, relentlessly, is this. If something can enter our sky from another star system without being noticed until now, what else has already passed through? What else has been here, moving silently while we lived inside our small, bright routines? And what exactly did Japan see that made them pause before they spoke? There are places on Earth where silence feels alive. Observatories are like that. Not silent because nothing happens. Silent because everything important happens without spectacle. Screens glow in dim rooms. Status panels breathe with soft pulses of color. Lines of data refresh, again and again, like the heartbeat of a machine that never sleeps. There is coffee cooling on desks. There are keyboards worn smooth by years of repeated attention. And outside the walls, beyond the dome, the night spreads out, so deep and full of distance that the human body feels almost inappropriate inside it. In those rooms, discoveries rarely feel like fireworks. Discoveries feel like paperwork. A timestamp. A coordinate. A faint streak detected by an algorithm designed to never be impressed. Which is why, when something truly unusual appears, it doesn't announce itself with drama. It announces itself by failing to be boring. That's the first crack. That's the first hook. The Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, Atlas, was built for vigilance, not poetry. It is a watchtower made of code and mirrors, a mechanical eye trained to notice motion against the fixed starfield. It doesn't look for beauty. It doesn't look for meaning. It looks for changes. It looks for things that don't belong. Night after night it sweeps. It subtracts the unmoving stars from the moving points. It isolates faint streaks so delicate that if you showed them to the untrained eye, they would be dismissed as noise. Motion becomes a suggestion. A suggestion becomes a candidate. A candidate becomes a set of positions repeated across nights. Each repetition tightens uncertainty like a thread pulled slowly through fabric. Most objects, once tracked, settle into their identities quickly. An asteroid in a known family. A comet with a familiar kind of breath. A rock that grew up here in our sun's light, obeying the habits of our neighborhood. But then, every so often, there is a dot that refuses to settle. Not loudly. Not rebelliously. Just stubbornly. A dot that looks clean on one night, slightly off on the next. Clean again. Off again. Not enough for alarm, but enough for discomfort. Enough to make a scientist rerun a model a second time. And a second time. And that second time doesn't bring reassurance. It brings clarity. Orbit fitting is supposed to be patient. You take measurements. You solve for the path. Gravity does the rest. The future becomes a smooth curve laid gently across time, as if the universe were kindly offering you a prediction. But the universe isn't kind. It's consistent. And consistency is not comfort. It is only obedience to rules we are still learning. When an object's orbit refuses to smooth out, residuals remain. Little differences between where the object should be and where it insists on being. Residuals are small things. In most cases, they shrink as you add more data. They vanish as uncertainty collapses. But sometimes they don't vanish. Sometimes they become a faint, persistent taste at the back of your mind. Like smoke you can't find the source of. And that is where fear begins in science. Not with panic. With precision. A scientist doesn't scream. The scientist checks. Was the timestamp right? Was the calibration correct? Did the telescope smear the point? Was the atmosphere unstable? Is this just a trick of our instruments? And then, when those explanations are stripped away one by one, only the object remains. And the object still refuses. This is the moment where the story becomes heavier, because a refusal in the numbers is not just a technical problem. It is the beginning of a mystery. It is the moment the universe stops being a background and becomes an active presence. The sky is normal, until the day it isn't. And the day it isn't begins with a whisper. This is where Japan enters the chain, not with ego, not with announcement, but with a kind of calm rigor that feels almost ceremonial. In Japan, confirmation is not just agreement. It is translation. Telescopes there don't merely look, they measure, characterize, dissect. A dot becomes a body. A body becomes a set of properties. Brightness, color, rotation, spectrum. The faint photons are treated like evidence from a crime scene. Handled carefully, repeated, cross-checked. Because to claim something unusual in astronomy is to invite the world's hunger. People want meaning. They want drama. They want the universe to speak in human tones. But the universe doesn't speak in human tones. It speaks in light curves. It speaks in spectral lines. It speaks in orbital residuals that refuse to die. Japanese teams step in at the moment when maybe must become yes. They take the object's light and split it, searching for chemical fingerprints hidden inside reflection. Water ice, carbon-rich compounds, silicates, organics weathered by radiation. Each material leaves a subtle imprint, like an accent in a voice you can't quite place. In a simpler story, this is where the object would finally reveal itself. The data would align. The label would click into place. It would become comfortably categorized. In this story, the data does the opposite. The brightness doesn't behave exactly like it should. The color suggests one composition. The spectrum hints at another. There is a softness, almost a haze, yet no obvious cometary tail. And something deeply unsettling happens. The more precise the measurements become, the less the object behaves like a simple thing. This is where the mind begins to lean forward. Because precision doesn't always remove fear. Sometimes it gives fear a shape. Sometimes it carves fear into a silhouette you can recognize in the dark. Orbits are not just paths. They are promises. They are the universe saying, if this is the only force acting, then this is what will happen. But small bodies do not always obey only gravity. They carry other influences like invisible hands. A faint push from outgassing, trapped ice turning into vapor, venting in jets too weak to form a visible tail but strong enough to alter motion by millimeters per second. A constant pressure from sunlight itself, solar radiation pressure, photons pushing against a low-mass surface like a steady wind. A subtle thermal effect, uneven heating causing asymmetric re-radiation, nudging the object in tiny increments. These forces are small, but over time they add up. And the math can detect them long before the eye can. That's the cruel elegance of astronomy. The truth often appears first as a problem in an equation. With 3i/Atlas, the orbit solution tightens, and still leaves a residue of wrongness. The best fits improve only when you add extra forces you cannot yet see. That's the hook sharpening itself. Because now you have two possibilities and both are unsettling. If it is active, if it is venting, why is it hiding so well? Where is the tail? Where is the plume? Where is the banner that comets usually throw behind them? And if it is not active, what else could produce the same signature? What else can push an object without leaving obvious breath? Absence becomes loud. Absence becomes a presence. And you begin to feel something strange. A cold awareness that the object is not simply moving. It is withholding. Light curves come next and they feel almost like a confession. A rotating object cannot hide that it has faces. As it spins, different surfaces catch sunlight and throw it back toward us. Brightness rises and falls. For many asteroids, it's a simple wave. For comets, it can pulse with activity, dust, jets. Japanese scientists examined the light curve of 3i/Atlas expecting something ordinary. A rotation period. A shape estimate. A clean signature. What they find is rhythm that doesn't want to be clean. Not a single smooth wave. Something layered. A flicker that feels like a thought forming and dissolving. Perhaps the object is tumbling, rotating around multiple axes, like a stone thrown badly through air. Perhaps it is a contact binary, two lobes joined, creating a stuttering reflection. Perhaps it has localized jets that wake and sleep, turning the light curve into something living. The data does not shout. It whispers possibilities without choosing one. And that is how obsession begins. When the universe offers you many doors and refuses to tell you which one leads to the truth. Once an object refuses a label, it becomes a mirror. You begin to question your categories. You begin to question your assumptions. And behind those questions waits something colder. How many times have we mistaken unfamiliar for ordinary simply because it was easier? Spectroscopy deepens the unease. Because spectra are supposed to be honest. They are sunlight returned, touched by the object's surface, carrying chemical memory. In Japanese data, the spectral hints don't align neatly. There may be darkness where fresh ice would be bright. There may be redness, the signature of long exposure to cosmic rays, the kind of weathering that happens in the deep between stars where time itself feels stretched. And yet there may be hints that feel strangely young, like parts of the surface have been renewed. Ancient and fresh. Old and newly skinned. How can something drift for millions of years in cold darkness and still look altered recently? One answer is weak activity. A tiny breath of gas can resurface a body without making a dramatic tale. Another answer is fracture. A fragment broken from a larger interstellar object not long ago, exposing new material. But then another question arrives, quiet and sharp. Why now? Why did we see it at this exact moment in human history? Why did it choose this era, this thin sliver of time when our instruments finally learned to listen properly? The universe has timing. We rarely admit it. But timing is one of its oldest languages. Now we reach the most frustrating part, the missing tail. Comets, when they are honest, announce themselves. They grow comas and tails, letting sunlight carve their breath into proof. But some objects whisper instead of singing. They release gas without dust. They hide their activity behind geometry. Their jets may point away from our line of sight. Their dust grains may be heavy. Their coma may be so faint it is almost indistinguishable from noise. Japanese observers search for the faintest halo. They stack images until stars become soft lines. They subtract backgrounds. They enhance contrast until the darkness feels fragile. Sometimes they find nothing. And sometimes, this is where dread begins to rise, they find something so subtle it could be dismissed, except it appears again. A faint softness. A suggestion of a coma. Not enough to satisfy. Enough to haunt. Like the object is practicing being visible, then withdrawing. And the mind cannot relax because the mind knows. The difference between nothing and something is everything. Then the word enters the room that changes the emotional weight of every measurement. Interstellar. If 3I/Atlas is truly interstellar, it was not born here. It formed around another star in another protoplanetary disk, under a different sky with different planets. It was ejected, by gravity, by chaos, by violence we can only infer, into the cold between systems. It wandered for perhaps millions of years, untouched except by radiation and time, until it brushed past our sun. Interstellar does not mean alien intelligence. It means alien origin. And alien origin is enough to shift the feeling of home. Because it proves the solar system is not sealed. It is permeable. A shoreline. A threshold. Japanese scientists treat this claim with careful language. Hyperbolic excess velocity. Eccentricity above 1. Barycentric orbit solutions. Cold words. Protective words. Words meant to keep the public imagination from overheating. But behind those words is a quiet realization that cannot be softened. Space is not empty. It is a corridor. And something just crossed ours. Tracing the orbit backward doesn't give a birthplace, but it gives direction. A vector. A hint of where it approached from relative to the sun's motion through the galaxy. Japanese analysts compare this to local interstellar flows, stellar streams. The heliosphere's nose where interstellar material presses against our solar bubble. If the direction aligns with something expected, relief flickers. If it doesn't, imagination wakes. But even expected becomes unsettling when you remember scale. Stars drift. Systems scatter debris. The Milky Way is not still. A direction is not a label. But it is enough to keep your mind turning the thought like a stone in your palm. Was it thrown out gently by a planet tugging too hard? Or violently by a chaotic system, a binary star, a dying giant shedding its outer layers? The past is invisible. But its shadow falls into the orbit. Now the story becomes personal in the quietest way. Because the moment you accept interstellar visitors equals real, the solar system stops feeling like a room. It becomes a coastline. And beyond it is an ocean that does not care what it brings. Size and shape deepen the uncertainty further. Brightness depends on distance and reflectivity. A small shiny object can look like a large dark one. A dark porous surface can trap light. Japanese teams constrain size through multiple wavelengths, phase angles, thermal modeling. They do not get certainty. They get ranges. And those ranges carry questions like hidden blades. If it is small, why does it behave as if it has more surface area? If it is large, why does it look so faint? If it is unusually dark, is it coated in radiation-processed organics, carbonized like coal from cosmic exposure? Or is the surface structured in a way that refuses to reflect honestly? We are trying to understand the object by the light it gives back. And it gives back only what it chooses. In space, even rocks can be private, not by intention but by physics. As confirmation spreads through the scientific chain, the public begins to lean in before it understands what it's leaning toward. Social media compresses uncertainty into certainty. Headlines shave off caveats. The phrase "Japanese scientists discovered" becomes a vessel for every fear and fantasy. Suddenly the object has two lives. One in data, one in imagination. Scientists watch this with quiet care because trust breaks easily. Yet they know imagination is not a flaw. It is how humans sense significance before proof arrives. The danger is when imagination outruns evidence. The tragedy is when evidence is ignored because it's not dramatic enough. So the scientists do what they always do. They measure again. They refine again. They wait again. And the universe moves without apology. A single anomaly is easy to dismiss. A cluster becomes difficult. Orbit drift. Faint coma hints. Spectral tension. Light curve complexity. None is a smoking gun alone. Together they begin to feel like a fingerprint. Partial. Smudged. Present. Japanese teams compare independent datasets. They hunt for instrumental errors. Seeing conditions. Calibration drift. They ask the hardest question in observation. Are we seeing the object? Or are we seeing our own limitations? And when independent evidence aligns, doubt transforms rather than vanishes. It becomes doubt about categories. Perhaps this is not a typical comet. Not a typical asteroid. Perhaps it is a hybrid. A body with buried ice under an insulating crust, venting weakly through cracks. Perhaps it is a fragment broken recently, exposing fresh patches. Perhaps it belongs to a class of objects we haven't named because we haven't met enough of them. And that is where unease enters. Because it's easier to fear a monster than to fear ambiguity. Ambiguity offers no end. Natural explanations gather like stones placed carefully on a table. A dormant interstellar comet. A dust-poor venting body. A contact binary. A tumbling fragment. Radiation pressure acting differently on an unusual shape. These explanations are grounded. They also imply a life history vast enough to feel unreal. Formation around another star, ejection into darkness, millions of years of cosmic ray weathering, and then arrival here into our instruments. Natural explanations do not remove wonder. They sharpen it. And still, there is always one leftover detail. One mismatch. One question that stays warm. And because the mind hates warmth without resolution, it wanders toward the forbidden hallway. Engineering. Propulsion. Concealment. The public will ask. It always does. Science treats these claims with discipline because extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Calmly, we name what would be required. Consistent thrust signatures not explainable by outgassing, spectral evidence of artificial materials, thermal anomalies, radio emissions, patterns that refuse natural physics. And we return to reality. Nature is stranger than fiction once you listen long enough. The universe doesn't need intention to feel intelligent. It only needs time. Japan's role adds gravity. Precision, restraint, repetition. A discovery handled quietly often means the threshold has been crossed carefully. Global collaboration turns into a slow collective awareness. Atlas detects, Japan characterizes, others confirm. And the story becomes less about one nation and more about a species learning how to listen together. Because the solar system itself becomes a detector. The sun interrogates visitors. Heat, wind, radiation, tidal stress. An interstellar object entering our neighborhood is not merely passing through light. It is passing through tests. And those tests can awaken hidden ice, open cracks, alter rotation, change behavior. Here the tension tightens again. If the object is quiet now, what happens when it gets closer? What if the true discovery isn't what it is, but what it becomes under the sun? Time compresses. Observation windows shift. Some nights are perfect, some are lost. The object may slip into solar glare, hidden behind brightness. Teams schedule telescope time like a scarce medicine. Data arrives in bursts like letters from a moving train. And beneath this controlled activity is an unspoken dread. What if we miss the crucial moment? What if the object changes while we can't see it? What if the most revealing breath happens behind the sun's light? Now the story widens into philosophy through science. Our categories are local dialects. Asteroid, comet, interstellar. We invented these bins based on what we've seen in a small sample. Interstellar visitors come from a vast library, countless star systems, countless formation histories, countless strange objects shaped by environments we've never experienced. It would be strange if they fit perfectly into our bins. What if 3i/Atlas is not misbehaving? What if it is normal, for somewhere else? What if our unease is simply the sound of our categories breaking? And then a quieter fear arrives. If one visitor can slip into our sky and only become real when we notice it, how many are passing through right now, too faint for our instruments? How crowded is the corridor we thought was empty? Even if the final answer becomes simple, natural interstellar debris with weak activity, our minds will still hunger for meaning. Facts alone do not satisfy the part of us that feels watched by the sky. We want discoveries to be messages because messages make us feel less alone. But the universe does not send letters. It sends objects. It sends motion. It sends things that do not care whether we are ready. And now, as we approach the ending, the gravity deepens not because the object is solved, but because we are changed by it. 3i/Atlas will leave. It will slip past the planets and out into the long black between stars. The data will remain. Spectra, light curves, orbit fits, residuals, papers. But the emotional residue will remain longer. Because once you accept interstellar traffic as real, home changes shape. The solar system becomes a shoreline. And we become a species living beside an ocean that occasionally returns things we did not send. There is humility in knowing that the most important events can be quiet. A faint dot. A stubborn residual. A spectral hint. This is how the universe communicates, through subtle deviations from expectation. Not with speeches, but with small betrayals that refuse to be ignored. When Japanese scientists just discovered something about 3i/Atlas, what they truly discovered may not be a single answer. It may be the shape of a question sharpened to a blade. A question that can survive without closure. Because closure is a luxury the cosmos rarely grants. If 3i/Atlas is interstellar, it has lived longer than our written history. It may have wandered through cold darkness so long that the concept of arrival feels meaningless. It may have passed stars that flared and died, planets that formed and shattered. And then, by gravity and chance, it entered a region where small beings built telescopes and trained them to notice motion against fixed lights. In that sense, it is not just a visitor. It is a test of attention, a test of humility, a test of whether we can hold uncertainty without turning it into panic or fantasy or denial. And perhaps the most haunting truth is this. We will never know how many such travelers have already passed. Before Atlas. Before modern surveys. Before we were awake enough to watch. The corridor has always been open. We are simply late to realizing we live beside it. Which means the question returns again, heavier than it was at the beginning, like a phrase repeated until it becomes hypnosis. If something can pass through our sky and become real only when we notice it, what else has already moved through the dark, unrecorded, unnamed? Because the universe does not hide its secrets behind walls. It hides them behind scale, behind faintness, behind the limits of our attention. And when we improve that attention, the universe does not become simpler. It becomes more alive, more crowded, more mysterious. So when 3i/Atlas fades beyond our instruments, when it slips into distance, when it becomes too faint, too quiet, too lost in the sun's glare, something will remain like pressure in the back of your mind. The awareness that the night is not empty. The awareness that motion is constant. The awareness that we are not the only story passing through this darkness. And if we are wrong about what 3I/Atlas is, then the coldest question remains open, breathing, patient. How much else are we wrong about? Simply because we haven't looked closely enough yet? Poetic closing line for end screen. A visitor crossed our sky and left our certainty slightly cracked, like ice under starlight. 3 ultra-short hook tags for intro overlay. It didn't belong here. The orbit wouldn't settle. Japan paused. We tracked the moment the sun's heat reaches the visitor's hidden layers, and the first true signal finally escapes.